Uh, Welcome, everyone. So glad that you are here and participating with us at Game Changing Job Strategies as an Applied Anthropologist. This is a 4-part webinar series hosted by AAA and designed especially for those whose jobs or job search opportunities have been disrupted by COVID-19. I'm Elizabeth Bryety. I'm a white woman with eyeglasses and short hair, and today I'm wearing a blue top. I am in my alcove, a little space in my house with a window. Today we have part 4 of this career webinar series called Facing the Interview Squad, Strategies That Impress. But before we begin, I would like to go over some webinar logistics. Next slide, please. We are using a number of features to make this webinar accessible to everyone. First, we are providing closed captioning. The icon is at the bottom of your screen. Second, the presenters will be providing visual descriptions of themselves, as I just did, and they will provide descriptions of their slides. Third, a reminder to the presenters to please announce yourself before you speak. Next, I would like everyone except the presenters to turn off their videos and microphones unless you are speaking. Next, open and use the chat function, which is also found at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, write the word question in large capital letters. This will help us to know that you have that question, and we will try to get an answer for you by the end of the webinar. If that is not possible, we will answer those questions after the webinar is over and post the responses on the AAA website. Next, we will have a poll. It's just a few questions at the start of the webinar, and it will help us know who is here so that we can customize our remarks. And finally, after the webinar is over, you can visit the AAA website for the following information on each of the 4 seminars. You will have the career webinar recordings. You will have the slide decks. You will have a set of career resources, and you will have answers to the chat questions. This webinar is a hybrid. For about 30 minutes, you will have an opportunity to do one of 2 things. Either you can go into a breakout session to practice being interviewed. Each breakout session will have a facilitator in it to work with you. Or your alternative is to remain in the main session and pose your questions to the presenters. If you opt for going into a breakout session, it is easy. You just click Join Room. If anyone has any technical difficulties by not being assigned to a breakout session, just use the chat and contact Scott Hall, our IT staff member, whose name is at or near the top of those listed in the chat room. During the breakout sessions, we invite all participants to announce themselves before they speak. So you might say, "This is Elizabeth," and then you continue with your comment or your question. If you require captioning during the breakout session, please notify Nell, our accessibilities coordinator, through the chat room. And she is listed also at the top of the chat as accessibility.anthro.org. If you have any other questions or needs, contact Nell also. And I want to say a big thank you to a few people. First, to Don Lehman and Joe Aiken, who have worked tirelessly with me to compile the information that we have presented in the 4 career webinars. I also want to thank the AAA staff, those who have been particularly helpful in working with us to expand the boundaries of the technology and to resolve all of the issues, making these webinars as smooth as humanly possible. Jeff Martin, Nell, Scott Hall, Sean Eiffel, Gabby Dunkley, Ed Lebo, and Daniel Ginsberg. We're now going to present a poll for our attendees, just so that we can get a better sense of who you are and what you're looking for. Right after the poll, we will begin our webinar. Just got a message from Scott saying there's a little bit of a poll issue. Scott, would you prefer that we just go ahead?
Hi, Elizabeth, this is Scott. It's probably best if we go ahead right now, and if we can launch it later, I'll do so, and I'll let you know. Thank you.
No problem at all. Next slide, please. I'd now like to introduce Joe Aiken, who will be leading this webinar.
This is Joe. Next slide, please. Again, welcome to the Facing the Interview Squad. Yes, I'm Joe Aiken. I am a woman with shoulder-length dark hair, and I'm sitting in my home office / art studio. There's a window behind me and art pieces hanging on the white wall above. Next slide. I'm going to share with you some tips on what to do before the interview. And I'm currently in a research position at University College London, but I'm very much an applied anthropologist, and I've worked in organizational and design anthropology. I also have over 15 years of experience in human resources. So I've been a hiring manager, I've worked in HR, in healthcare, nonprofit, and for the government. And most recently, I was an internal executive coach for CEO level government officials. So I've also taught people how to do interviewing as a hiring manager. Next slide. So I'm very excited to share with you some of my top tips. We have a very short amount of time today, so I'm going to give you my top tips on what to do before the interview. Number one, you're going to prepare and practice before the interview. Most of the content in our presentation today occurs before the interview because that's really the bulk of your work, is to do things before you actually turn up on that day or online. So first, you're going to review information about the organization and the job role. And I say review because you should have already done this when you send in a resume, but you're going to want to review what you learned at that time before you go into the interview. You're going to want to know what type of interview to expect. It's okay to ask them. You're going to sort out your technology ahead of time. We all know this of working at home during COVID, but still there are some tips you just need to remember. You're going to prepare your answers to interview questions, and I'm going to give you a model on how to do that. And you're going to practice, practice, practice. Next slide. So there are many types of interviews. Some of the most common ones are an HR pre-screening interview, a one-to-one interview, which is a very traditional, a sequential interview, which is a one-to-one, but you move from one person to the next person immediately following. And then there's the panel interview, which could include a hiring manager, other managers from departments, peers or future coworkers, or also a representative from HR. These are the most common ones. There's some other common interview types that are kind of industry dependent. So there's group interviews that might be used for pre-screening, a lunch interview, which were probably more common before COVID, but I'm sure they will return, where you're one-on-one and it's very casual. Portfolio presentations, we know, are very common in design firms. Or case studies where you're giving a fictional or even a real world example, and you're asked there on the spot to either write out or present how you would solve that problem. And then there's a self-recorded response where you're given a prompt ahead of time, you record your answer and you upload it online. So there's many types, but we're going to give you some tips today on how to basically navigate all of these. some of my top tips, especially for the panel interview, because those tend to be the most scary. That's why we titled this Facing the Interview Squad, because that can be the most intimidating. Next slide. Just some reminders on preparing for the online interview, because we know these are the most common right now. You're going to sort out your technology early. You cannot wait till the day of the interview. Adjust your camera to eye level and make sure you have picked an appropriate location or background. This is not the time to have your dirty laundry hanging up in the window behind you. You want to make sure everything about your presentation is professional. You're going to minimize distractions as much as possible. This means keeping your phone on mute, letting your friends and family know, hey, I'm about to be in an interview. Just don't come, knock on my office door, whatever it may be that you can do to minimize those ahead of time. And you're really going to plan to professionally. We can still see you on camera, so you're still going to want to look your best. And you're going to practice. You're going to hear me say this a million times probably. You're going to practice. Call your friend on GoToMeeting if that's what they're going to be using, and practice your interview questions. Next slide. Acing the first question. So no matter the interview type, just as kind of an icebreaker, you're typically going to hear something like, tell me about yourself. They have your resume. They know what your background is. This is really so much to refresh their memory as it is to kind of break the ice and get you talking. And it's really, really easy to fall into a trap of telling them your entire life story. This is not what you want to do. I'm going to give you a simple formula you can follow. First, you're going to present your current role, the present. What are you doing in the present? What's your title? What organization are you in? Are you a student? Just tell me who you are, what you're doing right now, and then tell me about your past, how you got to your current role, and a relevant previous experience. If you're a student, you just finished your master's, tell me what you studied before that, what university. And then the future, what do you want to do next? And most importantly, why you want the job. You're going to hear several times too, it's so important that you demonstrate that you are excited about the job you're interviewing for. Sometimes that can be what is the difference between two candidates. One, it was really obvious, and one, I was left kind of wondering, did they even really want that job? And above all, you're going to prepare your answer and practice, practice, practice. Next slide. So one of the most common types of interview questions you'll hear is, oh, it's going to be a typical interview, behavioral interview, or a behavioral competency-based interview. What are these? The Society for Human Resource Management defines these as interviews that focus on a candidate's past experiences, behaviors, knowledge, skills, and abilities by asking the candidate to provide specific examples of when he or she has demonstrated certain behaviors or skills as a means of predicting future behavior and performance. That is a mouthful, and that is a very long-winded definition to just kind of explain that the premise behind these types of interview questions is that your past experience will predict what your future performance in a job will be. So as a hiring manager, I'm going to ask you what you were like in your previous jobs, because that's going to tell me what your performance is going to be for me as a future employee. Next slide. These questions are typically long. They have multiple parts, and it's very more conversational. So they're easy to kind of pick out. Some example behavioral interview questions are, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult coworker. How did you handle the situation? What was your approach? How did they react? Another one might be, describe a situation in which your verbal communication skills made a difference in the outcome of a decision. How did you feel? What did you learn? So you can see there are all of these kind of probing questions at the end of what the actual question is. And a lot of interviewers and a lot of managers will just give you the whole rundown of the question. It makes it seem really daunting and really, really kind of scary. Also, you might be thinking, well, I'm new in my career and I've never had a difficult coworker, or I'm changing industries and my previous coworkers were other academics and I'm interviewing now for a consulting job. I'm going to give you some tips that can, a model that will make it really simple for you to answer these type of questions. Next slide. But what I want you to remember, even in terms of answering these questions, I want you to remember what employers are looking for. They're looking for qualities. They are interviewing you now based on your resume, so they know what your experience is and they know what your qualifications are. At this point in the hiring process, they're looking for your qualities like dependability, reliability, integrity, teamwork, collaboration, professionalism, customer focus. These are all things that you can bring to any job, no matter what your background. Leadership, adaptability, flexibility, very important right now in 2020. Critical thinking and motivation. And most importantly, fit. Do you fit the organization? That is the number one thing that you're trying to answer in an interview. Next slide. So my biggest tip in the model, I promise you, that will make answering these really difficult, scary questions easier, is to use the STAR model. It's a very, very simple framework. It takes practice, but we're going to walk you through the steps. So the first letter of the STAR model is S, situation. What was the context or role that you were in? Next is T, is task. What did you need to accomplish, or what was the expectation? Action, what actions did you take? Results, what were the results of these actions or your feedback? So you're going to take this model, you're going to prepare your answer, and you're going to practice these. Next slide. So a real world example, this is from my personal work history, and it's also something that I've used this same example in interviews. I'm not telling you it's perfect, but this is just one that I've used, and we can walk through it as an example. So an example interview question could be, tell me about a time when you added value to a particular project. The situation. As a management consultant at NASA, very short and sweet. You know what my title was, you know where I worked. Next was the task. I was asked to conduct a training needs assessment of the HR department. Specifically, they wanted me to conduct a survey that would inform a training course on customer service. What was I charged to do? Next slide. So the STAR model, my real world example, continued. Remember, the question is, tell me about a time you added value to a particular project. So we're on the A now, the action. What did I actually do? Well, while a survey could be useful, I knew I could gather more insightful data by interviewing the HR employees. First, I persuaded the HR director to allow me to conduct interviews instead of a survey. Then, using my skills as an anthropologist, I designed and carried out the employee interviews. I told them step by step what my actions actually were. Next slide. So finally, the result, the STAR model. And this is, again, is my real world example. And I'm just reminding you again, the question was, tell me about a time when you added value to a particular project. This is where they're getting to the actual meat of it. What was the result? So I completed the assessment 1 week ahead of schedule. The HR director was shocked, but pleased to see the results included insights on 6 additional competencies other than just customer service. 2 years later, they are still using my report to inform HR training courses. Very, very simple. It seems simple, but it's actually not. As it's not easy for anyone actually to come up with a result. For sales managers, their result is usually something like, well, you know, because of my work, we saw an 2% increase in sales for that quarter. As anthropologists, our work usually doesn't translate directly to something measurable. But here I've given 3 examples of how my results actually are measurable. I finished ahead of schedule. That is very, very measurable in terms of productivity. I also gave them more than they asked for. They asked for 1 competency. I gave them insights on 6. And they're still using, that's the biggest result. They are still using my report to inform training courses. Next slide. So just a few tips. Again, this is something you have to practice, but just some tips to keep in mind as you go through it. Keep it clear and concise. The situation and task of the STAR model should be 20% or less of your answer. Use active verbs, avoid jargon, which I know is really hard for anthropologists, and quantify results if possible. Sometimes it may absolutely not be possible, but this is why it helps to talk things out with friends and to kind of, you know, help each other see, well, what was the actual results? You know, time is a measurable, quantifiable result. Did you save your boss time? And then focus on what you did, not the team or others. It's great if you have a team example, you're going to need team examples, but I want to know as a hiring manager what you did specifically. And then you're going to prepare. You're going to write down at least 5 of these scenarios to have in your back pocket that you can use for any question. And we're going to put up a list of behavioral questions on the AAA website that you can use as examples. And then practice. Say it out loud. Record yourself with your phone and then listen to yourself. You really have to practice these, and it will look so good for you in an interview. I will know as a hiring manager that this person really wants the job because I can tell they practice their answers. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Gigi Taylor to give you some tips on what to do during the interview.
Hello, my name is Gigi Taylor. I'm a woman with short length, dark hair and glasses, and I am sitting in my home with a wall of books behind me. Next slide. So I will be talking about what to do during the interview. I currently work as a UX researcher, a qualitative UX researcher at Indeed. So I live and breathe the whole process of looking for jobs and employers looking for talent. So it's really great that I'm here, that I can share my experience. I am speaking to you as an anthropologist. Before joining Indeed, I had a consultancy, an anthropology consultancy. And before that, I worked as an advertising practitioner and academic. After my section, my colleague Cathleen will be also sharing what to do during the interview. Next slide. So I'm going to be talking about the top tips for what to do during the interview. The first thing is to show that you're interested in the job. There's a lot of ways you can do this. One is in your voice and your inflection. Another is, of course, smiling. And I'm always a big believer in using hands because it shows emphasis. You can kind of point to something. Also, if someone is talking and you have a point or a comment, you can always do one of these to say, signify that you have you want to jump in. Be confident but not arrogant. Know that some managers are just as nervous as you are about interviewing. This is part of their job. So have an acknowledgement that this is nervous potentially for everyone. Be confident but not arrogant. Interview them as well. You need to understand that when you're doing the interview, you're trying to see and assess, is this a good place for me? I always have a list of questions when I go into an interview, so definitely ask those questions. At the end of my section, my colleague Cathleen will also have another list of questions for you. Next slide. So don't just be on time, be 5 minutes early. And sometimes what I do is I actually go in and check the link before, an hour before, to make sure that it's all okay. And if it's not, I send a quick email. Address them formally unless invited to be informal. Take note of your personal appearance. And of course, understand that it should be in keeping with the culture of the organization. I usually do a little research before to understand what that culture is. Of course, minimize potential distractions with pets, other people living with you. And stage your virtual background. I know that Zoom, and we all know that Zoom might have some virtual backgrounds, but it gets a little funky when you start moving around. So just use your natural environment, but stage it. Of course, smile. Next slide. So make eye contact. You see where the camera is. Make sure you're talking directly into the camera. If you have a document that's open, that's helping you out, make sure it's positioned right under that camera. Make sure the camera is facing your face, because as you see, it gets a little funky otherwise. Speak clearly and confidently. Be honest, but don't overshare. And then understand who your audience is, who you're talking to. Use standard language. Your interviewer might not be an academic, or they might not be an anthropologist. So the language can be a bit off-putting. So use the standard language that it always works. Next slide. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Cathleen Crain, who will continue with some tips.
Hello, my name is Cathleen Crain. I'm a managing partner in LTG Associates. I have light hair and blue eyes, and behind me hanging on the wall is a brightly colored banner. I'm going to talk some more about what to do and some not to do during the interview. Next slide, please. It's important to emphasize your strengths and your qualifications. Know what they are, have those clearly in mind, and be ready to talk about them. If asked about your weaknesses, and this is something that interviewers will sometimes do, be prepared to answer with a strength. So, for example, I'm not happy delivering a B grade product, even if the client is only going to pay for a B grade product and will be happy with it. We do A quality work. But I do understand budget and time limitations, and I'm a good team player, and so that's what we will do. If you don't understand a question, stop and say so. It is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and people will stop and clarify. This is also a way of gathering your thoughts sometimes. Don't use it too frequently, but be sure that you're comfortable in doing that. Next slide, please. A rule that you should live by is do not criticize a previous employer, coworkers, or an organization, ever. They will believe that you will trash talk about them too. If you're having a sequential interviews, don't speak poorly about anyone else or say, that interview was really weird. I didn't understand what he was doing. Stay neutral about past experiences and about your organization. When answering a question, you can take a moment to gather your thoughts and then give your answer, stay on topic, and answer questions concisely. And finally, it's okay to take brief notes, but listen actively. Next slide, please. Really, really listen. Maintain eye contact, but make it normal. Listen for the interviewer's concerns and priorities. You can respond visually. We're human animals. So you can nod, you can smile appropriately, you can look puzzled, you can look studious. Those are all reasonable things to do. You can make normal affirmative sounds. It encourages the listener. Finally, listen for things to ask and follow-up questions about at the end. Next slide, please. Don't read your notes, interrupt, or look at your phone or check your email. Next slide, please. Remember, the interview is for you too. This is your time to find out if the position is right for you. You want to know what key qualities make an employee successful at this organization. What are the biggest challenges you could face? What does a typical day look like? And will there be opportunities for professional growth? A good job without opportunities for advancement and growth may not be a great job. Next slide, please. As your last question, ask what are the next steps in the interview or hiring process? Unmute Gigi, please.
Yes, confirm the time frame for the next steps and the ultimate selection decision. Find out what's your next steps.
Ask about expectation for a starting date. You need to know that if you're a serious candidate so that you can manage leaving your past organization or making a move if you need to.
Again, reiterate your enthusiasm for the position, that you're really interested and you want to be considered.
And finally, thank the interviewer by name for the opportunity to talk with them. Next slide.
Our next speaker will be Neil Tashima from LTG Associates.
Hi, I'm Neil Tashima. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Neil Tashima. I'm a founding and managing partner in LTG Associates. I'm a male, fourth generation, American-born Japanese American. I have silver frame glasses, longish salt and pepper hair with the emphasis on salt, and I'm wearing a Hawaiian print shirt. There's a Japanese shoji screen behind me. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about what to do after you've finished an interview for a position. Over the years, I've interviewed and hired any number of anthropologists at all levels, and I've had to tell some of them they were not a very good fit for the position. The preceding presenters have done a nice seamless job of telling you how best to prepare and engage in the interview, and I'm going to talk about about what you should do afterwards. But remember, this is a seamless process. So send a thank you note. In 2017, a CountTemp survey of more than 300 managers in the US found that only 24% of managers receive thank you notes from applicants. However, 80% of managers say thank you notes are helpful when reviewing candidates. And I'm one of those folks who believe a brief handwritten thank you note is really important in the hiring process. Some managers will wait to see who sends a thank you note. One of the presenters was told that she was hired because she was the only one who sent a thank you note. It may not sound fair, but you need to create ways for people to remember you. Next slide, please. Writing the note. Write a separate thank you letter to each interviewer. Thank them for the opportunity to interview. Briefly remind them about your skills. The job is a good fit for me because of X, Y, and Z and my past experience in X, Y, and Z. Note something of interest. I was especially interested to hear more about your team's future project ABC. Be sure to add a personal tone to the note. Remember, you want to set yourself apart from the rest of the applicants. Next slide, please. Send your thank you note within 24 hours. It's a good time frame. Sometimes life gets in the way and it may take you a couple of days, but always send one. Email is fastest, but also sending a handwritten note goes the extra mile. And you should note in your email, for example, P.S. Because I'm a big believer in handwritten thank you notes, you should be receiving a letter in the mail as well. Next slide, please. Following up the interview, and both Cathleen and Gigi started you down this path, email follow-up only after they said they would contact you. Respect their time frame, unless you have another offer in hand. Reiterate your interest and enthusiasm, and don't be a pest. Over the years, what I found is the anxiety that's created by applying for a position becomes overwhelming at times. And your challenge is to let it sit, be patient, and see how things play out. Next slide, please. If you get the job, feedback is useful for your professional development and personal growth. Your new boss will be impressed. Ask what you did well and what you can improve on. If you didn't get the job, there's an opportunity to gain insight about the industry, organization, recruiting, understand your competitors, and create future opportunities. Next slide, please. Respond to the rejection or email phone call by doing several things. Thank the interviewer again. You can do this on email. I think if you can call them, it's always better. Show continued interest in the company. Remember that there may be future opportunities, and that's an important element. Ask for feedback again, explaining your motivation. As a recent graduate, or as someone new to the private sector, I would be interested to hear any feedback you may have regarding my application and interview. Please do not feel depressed if people don't get back to you. It's a very busy world out there, and things move very quickly. And oftentimes, once a hiring manager has made a decision, they're often running into the next realm of what they're supposed to be doing. Next slide, please. Keep in mind that they might have simply selected someone else for a reason that had nothing to do with their qualifications or personality. Some organizations have policies mandating the number of applicants that are interviewed, or that they have to interview anyone with an advanced degree, or people who meet certain criteria. So that's it for the follow-up and thank you note. Thank you for your time, and now I'll turn this back to Joe.
This is Joe. So at this time, we're going to give you that option to either stay for a large group Q&A session where the presenters will answer questions, or you can join a smaller breakout group where we have facilitators to work with you using the STAR method. The Q&A session will be recorded for you, so you can go back and watch it online. You won't miss anything. After the webinar, you can go back and look at everything and review it. But this will be your only opportunity to get direct help using the STAR method. So for recording purposes, the CART captioner will be staying in the large Q&A session, which means we are unfortunately unable to provide captioning for anyone who needs it in the smaller group breakouts. For anyone whose access needs includes captioning, we do invite you to email Nell at accessibility@americananthro.org to schedule a separate time with myself, Joe, for a Google Meeting practice session. Google Meeting includes automated captioning that we can utilize for a separate breakout session outside of this webinar. So at this time, we'll give you a few more minutes to facilitate the opening of the breakout sessions. And depending on how you're connecting to Zoom, you may need to select the leave or join later option in order to remain in the large group Q&A. And I will turn it over to Daniel, who will help facilitate us with the Q&A session.
This is Daniel. I'm just giving everyone one more minute to get into the breakout rooms if they choose to, and then we can begin with the Q&A. All right, good afternoon. My name is Daniel Ginsberg. I work at the AAA. I am a male presenting white person with sort of floofy looking brown hair in my eyes and glasses and a blue collar shirt. And I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf with a little poster on the wall. I have been monitoring the questions that were raised in the chat. And so I've tried to distill a few things from those. So if anybody has anything else they'd like me to raise or any follow-ups, please continue to put that in the chat. I'll be watching it as we go. There's a few things that I have in my notes, though, to begin with, and I think I'll take them sequentially in the idea of how the interview process goes from start to finish. So among the questions that I saw, and some of these have been answered in the chat, but I thought they might be interesting to talk about with the group. The first thing that comes up is how to gauge the formality of people who you're interviewing or who are interviewing you. It's unlikely maybe that they'll say, please call me by my first name. If they do, that's clear and you're lucky. But if not, if they introduce themselves by first name, is that a sign that you should reciprocate? And if they're not that clear, how do you judge if you don't want to come off as overly familiar or stuffy?
This is Jo. I can answer probably from, I'll try the first part of that question. I'll give the others a chance to answer maybe the second part. So the first part, I guess, being how you gauge just the formality of an interview. You can actually do a lot of legwork before the interview and reach out to people in the organization. This is really easy if you have a friend that works there, but if not, there's LinkedIn. It's completely okay for you to reach out to someone and say, hey, I have an interview. Can you just let me know, should I wear a suit and tie, or is this not the culture of the organization? I think that's completely appropriate. I want to give the others a chance to chime in as well.
This is Cathleen. I will introduce myself as Good morning, I'm Cathleen Crain. I'm managing partner in LTG. I'm glad you came to this interview. Now, the problem I've created for you is that you don't know if you should call me Cathleen or if you should call me Ms. Crain. I'm perfectly comfortable in asking or in taking the lead and saying, thank you, Ms. Crain. And then I have the option as the interviewer of saying, oh, please call me Cathleen. If I don't say anything, then your cue is to continue to call me Ms. Crain or Dr. Bryady.
This is Gigi. I think those are all great, great comments. I think that what you can pick up through your email interactions, how the hiring manager will sign off. And if you don't know, I mean, I think just asking specifically in an email before the interview about appropriate dress, and just ask specifically, you know, what do you think is the appropriate way to engage with the person who you're talking with. A little bit of research also helps about the industry. I've been interviewing in the tech industry, and knowing kind of from other people who've worked in the industry, friends that have worked in the industry, it's fairly casual. So doing a little research about the industry that you're applying to.
That's great, thank you. The next question that came up was about specifically thinking about the STAR format and how you talk about results. The way the question was posed, it was thinking about if you work for an organization that maybe doesn't monitor results in a way that gets reported back to you so that you could talk about what you did. And also on top of this, in the questioner was saying, if your superiors or management are actually the ones who are standing in your way to try to get this done, how you might tell stories about things you tried to do, but trying to not talk bad about your former employer, but also not having results that you can speak to because you were sort of stymied. And I think there's also a bigger question here about just how do you talk about experiences that you've had at a difficult workplace in an interview context in ways that you still can present yourself professionally?
This is Jo. So first and foremost, no matter how you handle or what the question is, or even if it's a question about, tell me about a challenging boss you've had to work for, you cannot speak critically of former coworkers, former bosses, or the organization. You just cannot do it. You can talk about challenges, you cannot criticize them. When you're, in terms of the results, and like this is really common if you're working in consulting, where you're just in and out of the organization, you don't know how or even if they implemented anything you suggested. It's important to talk about results don't have to be a positive outcome, and there doesn't even have to be something like they implemented what you said that, what you suggested they do. The manager just completely ignored you. You don't talk about the manager at all. You say, I did this really groundbreaking interview. They'd only done surveys before. I interviewed their employees and got them to see things a little differently, got them to be more familiar with a different approach than just a survey. So I just answered your question and gave you a result without saying that it was the manager didn't want to ever do it. He never asked me to do interviewing ever again. You don't have to even tell them that. You need to make sure you keep it professional. And the results, again, don't have to be that they implemented it. The results can be that they asked you back for another consulting gig. It could be that you got really great feedback and questions, and you engaged in a conversation with your coworkers like you'd never done before because they'd never seen anything like this before. That's a result too.
This is Cathleen. I think Jo's made a lot of good points. I think the other thing is that very often what we do as anthropologists is we are working on very complex issues that are not going to have major leaps forward. And so being sure that you're taking into account incremental changes is important. So as Jo said, noting that they had never interviewed before, that's an important incremental change. So have those thought through and prepared. You don't have to have gone to the moon. It's enough that you went to San Francisco.
Thank you. The next question going through the list is about the questions that you might want to ask. I know there were a lot of great suggestions on the questions that you can ask as an interviewee to learn more about the organization and to learn more about the job that they're hiring you for. But there's also the sense that interviewers or hiring managers will judge you by the questions that you ask, or that they might even be expecting you to ask a certain question and testing you on whether or not you produce that question or not. That might be overstating it a little bit, but it's an understandable fear, even if, it may be true. And if it's not, it's still an understandable anxiety that interviewees would have. So in terms of how you present yourself by the questions that you ask, is there anything that people should know? And another thing that occurred to me personally related to that is to think about, are there questions that you shouldn't ask? Thinking about some of the questions that interviewers are prohibited by law from asking their interviewees, like, are you planning on having a baby anytime soon? Are there any things that you yourself as an interviewee should stay away from asking?
This is, yeah, I'm going to give you some HR answers and then I'll let the rest chime in. So there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of stuff to unpack there. In terms of, is there like, are hiring managers looking for a trick question? Or typically, no. I teach people how to interview. And the reason I teach people is because there are some really poor hiring managers out there who don't know how to interview. And it's important that you remember you're nervous, but a lot of them are nervous too. So I'm not saying the interviewer person is going to be perfect, but just know that typically there's not anything that they're trying to trip you up on. They're going to look for, yeah, did you ask a follow-up question? That's really important. They're also going to, you know, if you ask a question that demonstrates your complete ignorance of the company, that's really bad. But it's really, really unlikely that they're looking for some trick question. Oh, she asked the magical question. That's awful. I can't believe she asked that. That is very, very unlikely. In terms of asking questions that hiring managers can't ask, their state laws are different in the US, and of course there's different laws abroad as well. It's not so much that they can't ask you those questions, but they can't put themselves in a position where it looks like they hired you or didn't hire you because of your answers to those questions. So it's very likely that you'll have a very inexperienced hiring manager that asks you, what year did you graduate high school? They can't ask you that. That's actually something that they cannot ask you. You should not answer that question, or you should just say, oh, well, you know, I'm now in college, so, or I just got my master's, you move on from it. But it's not so much that they can get in trouble for that. They can get in trouble for if you can go back and make a lawsuit. And those are very, very common lawsuits against organizations, because people say, well, they found out I was, 3 months pregnant because I told them. Well, I told them that. I gave them that information. And then I feel like they didn't hire me because of that. So that's kind of some of the HR answers to it. And maybe some of the others have some other thoughts.
This is Gigi. I just recently went through this, and the whole idea of kind of reflecting on your questions as a way to reflect who you are. I mean, inevitably it is, but I would just suggest just be true and honest to yourselves on what are your questions, and ask those questions, and not necessarily sort of second guessing on, are these the right or wrong ones? So the ones that I asked, and the ones that are sort of kind of typical ones, is you want to know exactly what is the nature of this job. Is this the right fit for you? How will you be evaluated? So based on that, questions would be something like, what's a typical day like? What's the type of research that is done here? Something that's very important when you go from academia to industry is trying to understand the cadence or the pace, how quickly that research is done. So asking about that, asking how research is evaluated, how it's presented. And then other questions, sort of from an anthropological perspective, is, what are the values and the culture of this organization? So, and I think it would be fair to ask, what are the challenges of research done in this organization? So those are some questions to ask. And I would walk in with a list of, like, literally, well, when we used to walk into interviews, with a list of questions that I would ask. And then, of course, as you ask the questions, there's even more questions. So I would just encourage you to ask the questions to help you understand if this is a right fit for you.
Hello, this is Neil. One of the things I'm always surprised about, particularly from anthropologists who are applying for positions, is a lack of curiosity. Because I'm an anthropologist and I'm hiring for a position, I want to know if that person's curious. Are they curious about the company? And Gigi had some great questions about the technical nuts and bolts of it. But are they curious about where the long-range plan is going? Or if you've taken the time to review their long-range plan, how do you see a fit for the kind of qualitative skills you're bringing? But that curiosity that we should have as anthropologists need to bubble up somehow in your interview.
There's also a question that just came up in the chat that's related to this, which is to say, if you have a panel that's interviewing you or a sequence of interviews, is there a chance that you might have some questions as a candidate that are appropriate to ask of some people but not of others? And how would you judge that?
This is Joe. I probably wouldn't ask the HR rep, you know, what's the typical day like sort of question, because I would want to hear that from, if it was a panel interview, I might ask or direct my answer to the kind of peers or coworkers in the room or the hiring manager. I wouldn't really direct that question to HR.
When you go into a panel type of discussion, usually in advance, you will have an idea of who you're interviewing, who will be doing the interviewing, and often they might split it out by seniority, you know, senior leadership, mid-management, peers, you know, kind of by level, or it's by department. So people in product, in my experience, product, or designers, or fellow UX researchers. So, you know, you would base your questions on who you're talking to.
This is Elizabeth. I think you can also ask the person that you're talking to explain why they ended up at this organization. What were the factors that they took into account that led them to accept the position? And you can ask, to what extent have they been satisfied at the organization where you are interviewing? What was going on in their mind? What did they find the culture to be like? All those kinds of things that, you know, if you were on site for a while, you would get some insight into, but because the interview is so short, you've got to be quick about it.
This is Cathleen. As good anthropologists, we also frame those kinds of questions as, I'm curious, could you share? Can you help me to understand? You soften the front end, because if somebody is not interested in sharing, you need to give them a chance to back away comfortably. So if your hiring manager is not a happy camper and he or she does not want to talk about it, you give them an out.
There's a lot of great questions that are showing up in the chat now, and we've only got about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to pick one that came up a lot earlier in the thread. One thing that I'm not going to ask to the panel is about salary. How do you answer the question about what salary are you expecting? There have been a lot of good answers to that in the chat already. And so I would encourage people to go back through and read the transcript. And then if people want to, we can discuss it further on the AAA Communities site. But another thing that came up a lot is there seem to be a lot of wrinkles about thank you notes that we should maybe talk more about. For example, there may be instances when you've been interviewed by someone that you don't have a mailing address available for a handwritten thank you note, that because of the nature of the industry, you might not even have any contact information for them whatsoever. There's also maybe differences by industry or by sector. Like it might not be the same kind of practice to send a thank you note for a federal government job. And there was even one question about cross-cultural differences or international differences, where in this case, there may be some laws in India about academic hiring that would make writing a thank you note seem like trying to influence someone's decision in an unfair or unethical way. So I don't necessarily expect anyone on the panel to be able to talk about India specifically, but just thinking about some of these other aspects of the expectation of a thank you note that might have some differences or some variations in these different kind of circumstances.
This is Joe. I guess I'm going to touch a couple of things and probably backwards. As far as government jobs, it is absolutely okay to send a thank you, and it's not a just blanketed federal government that it's inappropriate. Just keep in mind each agency or organization in the government has its own culture. So I can't speak to every single agency, but I know most of them, they go through the same interview training that HR people in my agency did. It's very, very regimented. So most of them still kind of expect a thank you note. And also too, the hiring managers weren't always in government most of the time. So they may have worked in other companies or organizations where that was the norm. So it's definitely okay. You kind of have just use your I guess powers of, whatever investigation to kind of figure that out, which goes to the first point I wanted to touch on. What if you don't have the email or the contact information for people? Typically, it's going to be very unlikely that you don't have a contact information for someone. So, someone has contacted you to give you the information on, how to log in or where to show up for your interview. It's pretty likely it could be an HR contact. These people they're used to people reaching out to them, asking them these questions. Again, don't pester them, stay professional, but it's completely okay to say, I really enjoyed my interview. I really want to reach out to Cathleen. I don't have her email address. Could you please provide that for me? If you can remember it in the interview, it's very, very important. If you can, it's probably like a good insider tip when you're leaving the interview to either ask for a business card. This is probably pre-COVID stuff, but someday maybe we'll get back there. Or you can ask them even at the end of the interview, it's okay if I follow up with you. Let them give you their email or not. Don't don't let it be a forceful thing, but it's okay. And it's okay, especially to go back to that HR person and say, hey, could you at least forward, I have an email. I just want to say, thank you. You could at least forward this. I may or may not get to them, but that's a tip I've done in the past and it's worked.
Okay, I don't know I think we still have a few more minutes. I'm not sure if the breakout sessions are going to go on for another.
No, I think we should go ahead and finish up.
Okay, so we're going to be shutting down the breakout sessions now to bring the people back in so that we can do a group wrap up with everyone here, including the Q&A and the breakout session. Before we do, I just want to say thanks again to all the panelists for your responses to these questions. And as I said, there are some things that were raised in the chat, that were answered in the chat, that we unfortunately didn't have time to talk about out loud, that I encourage you to read back over the chat transcript. And also we do have a group for the attendees at this event on the website, community.americananthro.org, that you will be able to talk to one another and to some of the members of the panel asynchronously going forward for anything that we didn't have time to get to.
Kathleen, can I ask everybody to turn their camera on if you have? I really like to see faces. I'm an anthropologist. Thank you. Nice to see you. Hello. A fine looking group. Thank you.
Daniel, did the poll ever get taken?
No, there were some technical difficulties and we weren't able to do the poll this time.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
This is Kathleen.
We will be sending out a follow-up survey though to everyone. So watch your email for that.
This is Kathleen. Just a quick note about salaries. There are lots of resources on the internet where you can research what's paid in the industry and what's paid specifically in different companies. So if you're concerned about salaries, do as much research as possible beforehand, and don't get trapped into saying, I want X number of dollars.
Another place to go are university career counseling centers. If you're not too far removed from your university experience, go back to them. They have all kinds of information. The Small Business Administration may also provide information about salary ranges for specific kinds of jobs.
It looks like we are just about out of time. So Gabby, I wonder, could you put up the last, second to the last slide, I think it is. So we want to thank you all for coming today. It's been a good discussion. Couple of things. First of all, everyone who registered for this webinar will be receiving an evaluation via email. Please fill it out. We are looking for ways to improve. Please let us know if there were any issues with your participation at this particular seminar. Again, we're trying to fix things that come along as quickly as possible. You can visit the community's website on the AAA site, and you will see the webinar recording, the slide deck, the chat responses, and a whole bunch of career resources. Excuse me, I misspoke. It's not on the community's website. It's on the AAA website. Just search for webinar and you will find it. Perhaps somebody can put the link into the chat. And then look for a new series of career webinars, hopefully coming your way this September on very different topics. Thank you again. Thanks to the staff. Thanks to all of our presenters today and to our facilitators. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Take care.